Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey, and welcome to the Family Ministry Podcast. In case you're ever wondering why is it called the Family Ministry Podcast, it's not just about ministering to families in the broad sense. It's also because we hit different topics on this podcast under the Family Ministry umbrella. We talk about children's ministry some weeks, student ministry, or maybe we get specific and talk preschool or elementary or middle school or high school, college. A lot of times we talk about topics that apply across the board, or maybe if you're a next-gen pastor like I am, sometimes we'll talk about that role specifically. But in this episode, 156, I talk with Sydney Lester about student ministry. Sydney's the student director at Connexus Church, north of Toronto, Canada. If you listen to Carrie Newhoff's podcast, you're familiar with Connexus Church. And we talk all about reaching unchurched students in youth ministry, because that's what they do at Connexus Church. They reach a high percentage of people, not just students, but a high percentage of people in their church were not a part of a church before coming to Connexus. A higher percentage than I think most churches. And that is true in their student ministry as well. So Sydney and I talk about, what does that look like? How does that work? What percentage of students have their parents involved in the church versus the ones that don't? How do you teach students, that are brand new to faith, brand new to church, haven't heard a lot about Jesus and God and all of that? And she even gives us some of the specific things they do to help grow their faith and kind of teach them the foundations. And so it's a great interview. Loved hearing from Sydney. She shares her director job description and the checklist she gives to her volunteer directors. You'll hear her talk about that, and you can get that if you subscribe to my email list. Just go to nickblevins.com/episode 156. We'll have all the notes and links and everything there, and you'll also be able to sign up for my email list to be able to get some of these exclusive podcast downloads like her volunteer checklist and job description. But let's go ahead now, jump into my conversation with Sydney Lester about reaching unchurched students in youth ministry. Today I'm talking with Sydney Lester. Welcome to the podcast, Sydney.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us about yourself, and you serve at Connexus Church, which many listeners will be familiar with, but give us an update on Connexus. I think I was telling you the last Carrie Newhoff's the only person we've had on from your team on the podcast, I think, ever. And that was a while ago. A lot has changed. Carrie changed roles there and all that stuff. So tell us about you, and then give us an update on Connexus before we jump in.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Sydney Lester. I oversee multi-campus student ministry here at Connexus, which is up in Canada if you're unfamiliar with it. So we run middle school and high school at 3 locations, and I have been on staff here for 4 years, but I've been part of Connexus for 12 since we started. And yeah, lots of changes have happened since I started here. So Jeff Brody moved into the lead pastor role, and then Carrie Newhoff moved into our teaching pastor position. So now Jeff leads us all, and Carrie does all of the communicating for us, and it's been so wonderful for our church. Jeff has really taken us to the next level, and obviously Carrie's a great communicator, so it's just an awesome balance. So yeah, lots of changes, but lots of really great things have happened since that transition happened.
Yeah. When did the third campus launch?
So the third campus launched a year and a half ago, so in January of 2018. Okay,
gotcha. Cool. Well, we're going to talk about student ministry and especially reaching unchurched students, which is certainly the landscape you have there in Canada. And so, but before we get into that specifically, tell us what student ministry looks like at Connexus. Like, what's the rhythm? What's the schedule? What's a typical week?
Yeah, so we have middle school and high school separated. So we run middle school at 3 of our campuses on Sunday mornings, and then we run high school on Sunday nights from 7 to 9 o'clock. We teach primarily using video for consistency's sake, and it's hard to schedule communicators between multi-campus, multi-environments. So it could be myself on the screen. We use a lot of Orange, like XP3 curriculum. Life Church has really great resources on their site. And then we also use a program called Youth Alpha for our communication. So that's kind of how we operate up here in Canada.
Yeah, and most of that is a typical kind of the North Point model, which you're a partner of North Point. Now, like doing the video communication, not necessarily. And you run it all year, like student ministry meets through summer as well?
Middle school meets year round. High school, we take a break because so many of our high schoolers serve at summer camps around us. And so we take a break over the summer and we do 3 parties for them rather than meeting every single week. But middle school continues to run through the summer since it happens on Sunday mornings.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I'm not as familiar with it, but I know like Christian camps in Canada are a big thing, or at least where you're located.
Yeah,
I didn't know that, but I think actually your mom, I think, is the one who's telling me about how huge that is and how typical it is. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know that. That's cool.
Yeah, so I would say 70% of our kids go away to camp for the whole summer.
Yeah, gosh, that's interesting. It did not know that. That was news to me when I first heard that, which is pretty cool though. That's pretty cool thing. It makes sense for you to adapt your programming around that. So that's your general program. You probably have some trips and retreats and things like that thrown in there throughout the year.
Yep.
But small groups meet when students meet, right? They're not like separate in homes or whatever.
Nope. They meet Sunday mornings and Sunday nights during our, hour-long service in the morning and 2 hours on Sunday nights. Everything happens at the same time.
Now, let's talk about reaching unchurched students. And I have kind of my own theory, and I'm sure a lot of people on here would disagree, especially being in different parts of the country. But I just, and some of the data even shows this, so it's not even like I just make this up. But to me, it seems like the more north and east you go in our continent, I'll say, the more, generally speaking, unchurched it gets. And that's also true northwest, right? Like, so Seattle, much less church than, let's say, Southern California or, Arizona or Arkansas or something like that. So, and I don't know what it's like in Canada and northwest, but I just feel like the more northeast you go, and certainly Toronto, north of Toronto there, it's going to be very unchurched. Canada has always seemed like 10 years at least ahead of the curve with the United States in terms of church culture, right? Being a post-Christian or whatever. So you're very familiar with that there. So what have you tried in terms of reaching unchurched students that hasn't worked? Tell us like what has not worked as you've tried to
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've tried everything. We've thrown everything at the wall to see what has stuck. But I think the biggest thing we've realized that doesn't work is, you can have the best lights, the best programming, the best environments, but at the end of the day, kids don't really care about that. They care about the relationship that is being built with their small group leader. But for a season, we tried having the best lights, having the best events. So we had a season where every single Sunday we would run an event. So like a Hawaiian night, a tie-dye night, camo night, things like that we thought would give students something to talk about with their friends, like, hey, do you want to come to this Hawaiian night at my youth group? Something to talk about. But in the end, our church kids loved it, but they didn't invite their friends because we weren't doing it with excellence. We were just doing it to do it. So that was one where everybody who asks me this question, like, what have you tried? I'm like, we tried events every single week. Don't do it. It did not work at all. So that was a big one that we did for probably, I want to say like a year we tried that. And then we just decided, you know what, we need to shift our focus and we need to put more energy and effort behind small groups because that's what's working for us. And then we also had a season where we ran off Sunday events. Probably every other month we would do like scavenger hunts around our cities or, movie nights or whatever. And again, we just didn't see the success with those events. Kids they felt like it was too much, too often. So it wasn't really like a special thing. It was just like, oh yeah, we do this thing every other month and we don't want to invite our friends to it for whatever reason. So those are some of the things that we've tried that, they just, haven't worked for us. We thought they would. We were like, this is a brilliant idea. And in the end, it was just like, oh, we're still reaching just our church kids. So what do we need to do to reach the unchurched students in our communities?
Well, what has worked? I'm sure there's like more you'd like to reach and a lot more you'd like to improve or do better or whatever, but you've been able to reach some students who are not a part of any church. What has worked?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of different between environments. So for high schoolers, I think, like I touched on earlier, we just realized that the relationship with their small group leader is key. Even if we have, the best lights, the best looking spaces, the best snack, whatever it might be, if they aren't connecting with their small group leader, they aren't going to want to come back. So we leave a lot of intentional community time at the top of the night for small group leaders to connect with their students, for students to connect with each other. And I've just heard time and time again that high school students invite their friends because they want them to meet their small group leader, not because, we have the best games or the best looking spaces. They're like, hey, I want you to meet this person that has really impacted my life, because they mean so much to me. So I think that's what we've realized is working for high schoolers. So yeah, we just leave a ton of community time for those relationships to develop organically and authentically. And for middle schoolers, we run 2 big events throughout the year that we have discovered help, reach unchurched students. So we do a huge all-nighter retreat in the fall. It's called our My Life Weekend. And because we've continued to run that event over and over year, it's developed so much traction with our middle schoolers that now that's one of our biggest events that we do. And technically it's a retreat, like it's a church retreat, but unchurched students are wanting to come because their friends are talking it up so much. So that's one that has worked for us. And then another event that we do is called Double Dog Dare, which is part of the North Point world. And it's an invest and invite opportunity where they invite all of their friends over for a sleepover. They compete in a bunch of dares that we post online. They submit their photos and then they sleep over at their friend's house and then they come Sunday morning and they have a chance to win prizes. And because we have run this event year over year, by the time that, 4th or 5th graders are moving up to our environment, they've already heard about Double Dog Dare and they're excited about it. Same with our My Life Weekend. So they want to invite their friends because they're like, this is the most fun event ever. So that's what we've realized for middle schoolers is those 2 events are key. So putting a lot of energy into them and then making sure that we have something that they can come back to the next week, whether it's a kickoff of a great series or they can come back and redeem t-shirts. We've done that in the past where if they came back after My Life Weekend, they got a t-shirt, just giving them a way to come back to our ministry, come back to our church. So those 2 things have been huge for middle schoolers. And then for high school events, what we found works is just doing less frequent events, but doing them with excellence. So we do not small group focused events 2 to 4 times a year, depending on the schedule, that help onboard unchurched students, because it can be really intimidating to invite a friend to youth group and have them sit in on your small group time, which kind of feels like your own time to discuss what you're going through. So we give them opportunities to invite their friends, like our Christmas party. We'll do nights of worship, Super Bowl party, and summer pool parties that we say, hey, these are not small group focused. You don't have to divide into small groups. It's just a way for your friends to meet other students that are part of Inside Out and your small group leaders. So this has just really helped bring in unchurched students without the pressure of small groups being there. And then usually they have a great time and they want to come check us out on a Sunday morning or a Sunday night.
That's cool. We've done Double Dog Dare for a number of years now. And I think we changed it up this year, where it was a little bit more like you're talking about, where kids are inviting their friends to sleep over at their own house and all that and that kind of stuff. And I do think, the way we had done it before, we had the host homes. And so it was easier, like for our kids who were already part of our ministry, it was very similar to how we do some of our other retreats and summer stuff like that. So it was easier. This year we tried to do more of that emphasis, and it was a little bit harder. What was interesting was we got a higher percentage of students who weren't a part of our church, but lower participation overall. So I'm curious, we weren't even planning on diving in here, but I'd love to hear, how has Double Dog progressed for you all from year 1 to now? Did you really need to build it and help parents and students get a sense of what it is to grow their participation in it? And even just maybe give us a picture overall of how well attended it is, maybe compared to your normal middle school environment.
Yeah. So we had to work really hard. So at our 3rd location, we just did Double Dog Dare for the first time. So I kind of just came through that, of oh yeah, we're running for this for the first time and parents don't know what it is. Kids don't know what to expect. but yeah, we had to continue. We just committed to running it every single year. And so we've adapted it a lot over the years, but I think that consistency of running it over and over again and reminding them that like, hey, this is an opportunity for you to invite your friends on your hockey team or your friends on your soccer team or your friends from dance, so that they can get in our doors and hopefully, come to know a God that loves them. But our participation is pretty strong because the word of mouth is so strong with our students. They really talk it up and, they get it. So their friends want to participate because their friends are talking it up to them. But yeah, so last Double Dog Dare that we had was in April. So our average attendance is probably around 100 middle schoolers, 75 middle schoolers maybe. And we see double, almost triple that number on Double Dog Dare Sundays.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
And
it's huge.
They stay overnight? Is it like Saturday and then they come Sunday morning to your experience? Is that how that works?
Yeah. So the dares open at 6:30 at night and then close at 9:30. So it's not a super late night for parents. They can hopefully their kids can still get some sleep, and then they come to whatever transit they attend. So whether it's the 9:00 or 10:30, they all come to that service on Sunday morning. We do the big giveaways and have all the fun during those service times.
That's awesome. That probably helped people get a picture of it. I don't know if this is still the case, but I know a year or two ago, you could get on a site with North Point and even get some of the information or resources they use. I don't know if that's still the case, but if people are if a student ministry person is listening, think, hey, we might want to try that. I know there were some resources. I think if you go to doubledogdareathon.org, all the resources are there for any church. They have all the dares, all the, list of what you need to do. So it's really well laid out if anybody's interested in doing it. It's a great event. Awesome. So in terms of like students inviting to their small group, and you talked about that with high school, and that might happen with the middle school too, but what do you think helps students invite to their small group specifically? And maybe the other side of that question is, what are small group leaders doing and how are you helping them so that students invite? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the idea that, hey, I want to invite you to meet my small group leader. I don't know. That's awesome. I don't know if I would have thought that as a student in church. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I probably maybe when I got older, and we didn't exactly have the small group model. But that's unique. And so how does that work? And what do you think helps them invite to their small groups?
I think a big thing is when their small group leader shows up outside of a Sunday. So I remember when I was in high school, my small group leader would just show up at things I was doing. So if I was, in a play or if I had an event, they would show up at it. And all of my friends were like, who is this person and why are they here to see you? Like they would show up with signs or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's my small group leader from church. And I think that helps students kind of bridge the gap between being like, I want to talk about church, but I don't know how to bring it up. So when their small group leader shows up outside of Sunday, they're like, okay, like what is going on here? Why does this adult want to hang out with you? Not in a bad way, but just a genuinely curious way, because I think, students are looking for community. A lot of the students in our churches are coming from broken homes. And so they're looking for people to believe in them, for people to genuinely and authentically care about them. And so when they see that happening, they want to be part of it as well. So I think it's huge when small group leaders are showing up outside of Sunday for their small groups.
How do you encourage that? And do you talk about it like it's a requirement, or is it more like you just encourage it and celebrate when it happens? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we do Lead Small every year with our small group leaders. And so that is one of the Lead Small principles, is showing up randomly. And so it's not a requirement, but it is kind of an expectation that you're either organizing events to do with your whole small group or you're showing up randomly for the few that you've connected with. And then my volunteer directors, they oversee each environment. They're, our highest level of leaders in our ministry. They're also encouraging their small group leaders to connect outside of Sunday mornings or Sunday nights. So it's not just coming from me. It's also coming from their volunteer director. And we just celebrate it huge when those things happen, because what is celebrated is what gets repeated. So we post on social media. We send emails to parents. And then we talk it up in our leader huddles, just saying like, hey, look at this person doing an amazing job as a small group leader. And then we hope that the people that aren't doing that kind of rise to the occasion. And sometimes they can't because of family life or, they don't have time or whatever. But most of the time that ripples down and they're like, oh, I should be doing something outside of Sundays because look at all the praise that these people are getting. And they want that for their groups usually. So yeah, so it's not a requirement, but it is kind of an expectation for small group leaders.
Cool. Yeah, we do the same kind of thing. I wouldn't say it's a requirement, but it is like an expectation, and we definitely try to celebrate it when it happens. If you know specifically, or maybe you're just going to guess, thinking about your student ministry, what % of students in your ministry have parents who are involved in Connexus? You know what I mean? Like their family's involved, and so that's why they're involved in your student ministry, versus what % of the students in the ministry don't? Like they came, they got invited by a friend or whatever, and they're involved in Connexus student ministry, but their parents aren't. You know what I mean? Like their whole family's not part of the church.
Yeah, so that's a great question because I think it just shows, the differences between locations and the differences between, kids and whatever. So it's funny because one of our locations is higher and one is lower. So Barrie, I ran the numbers and it's around 35% of parents are involved at Connexus. So that's, it's okay, but it's not great because Aurelia is 64% of parents are involved at Connexus, whether it's serving or giving or, in a small group. And that really, Aurelia is our smaller location. And so it's a little bit more hyper connected. It's, people that have been there for a long time, whereas Barrie is very transient and people come and go and they might call Connexus their home church, but they come 6 times a year. So it's significantly lower at our Barrie location, but those are the people that invite their friends more because they're more unchurched than our Aurelia campus, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. So it's like a third at one, 2/3 at the other. Now you mentioned involved, parents who are involved, or like maybe small group serving, giving. Is there a chance that there's a higher percentage of them that are just attending? Or
yes.
Is that something you looked at? Yeah. So there's a chance they're attending, but they're not really involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about, we've looked at that at our church before. It's been a while, and I'm sure people listening are thinking about what it is for their church. But a lot of times, a student ministry can be large and be a certain size, and a lot of it is because you're reaching students, beyond what the church itself is reaching. You know what I mean? Which is important. Mm-hmm. That's good. So here's a specific thing I'm wondering about, because when you're talking about reaching students who are not part of any church, how have you helped teach them the Bible, knowing that they're not familiar with it at all? You're using video communication. So on one hand, like when you record it, you control that. But if you're using Life Church or XP3 or whatever, you don't control that. Now they both do a good job, I think, of not being churchy in their teaching, but still there's just another level to it. So how have you helped teach the Bible to students who are not familiar with it at all?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that we do is we always try to remember that unchurched students are in the room. And so we try to avoid saying things like, oh, this in the Bible. Even in small groups, we try to avoid saying like, oh, that story in the Bible, because lots of times our students just don't know the Bible stories. Like I met a girl 2 years ago now. She was in the 8th grade, came to Connexus for Easter. It was her first time there. And she came up to me after and she was asking all these questions like, did Jesus die on the cross? Is that a true story? Why did he have to die? Did he really come back to life? And like she was 14 and had never really heard the Easter story before, which to me is crazy, but it's a constant reminder that these kids are not unchurched because they're walking away from faith. They're actually 2 or 3 generations removed from faith. Like their parents never went to church and their grandparents never went to church because they just don't know that it's important. So we try to always keep in mind that, hey, unchurched students are in the room. And so we need to be really clear with our communication and with our expectations of students. And then we place huge emphasis on small group leaders to try and help them unpack the Bible verses. So, if we're watching an XP3 video and they bring up a Bible passage, the small group leaders are prepped that, hey, if this seems like it's not connecting with students, maybe you need to unpack a little bit further with them in small groups where this comes from in the Bible, why it's relevant, that type of thing. And then we also prep our small group leaders. If we're doing an XT3 series, there's always YouVersion Bible plans that they can do with their students. We also print off the devotions for them. And then, just trying to be as open to it as possible for students to ask their questions about the Bible. We don't do any sort of formal Bible study with them. But it is definitely a challenge trying to teach the Bible to them when sometimes we're the only people teaching it to them because their parents are also trying to figure it out, what it means. So just leaving room for their questions and making sure they know, hey, even if you don't know this Bible story, like that's okay, you belong here. And so small group leaders do a really great job of helping them unpack. And then we always make sure that if a student doesn't have a Bible, we get them a Bible. It's not one of those ugly, typical church Bibles. It's like an actual pretty teen Bible, so that they can unpack it if they want at home.
That's good. That's good. And maybe this next thing will be a part of it too. I'm not really sure, but tell us about what is Youth Alpha. You mentioned that earlier, and how you've used it, and what kind of fruit have you seen from it?
Yeah, so Youth Alpha is amazing. It is a 13 kind of week teaching series, which sounds crazy, like crazy long. But it's asking some of the biggest questions around Christianity. It's kind of like an apologetic series, I guess. But it's really designed to create a conversation with people. So whether you believe what's being taught or you don't, it's just giving you all of the information. So some of the questions that they ask is like, how do I know that the Bible is true? So that's also one, if kids were asking questions about the Bible, I would point them to that week of Youth Alpha because it goes into incredible depth about how we can trust the Bible, why it's important to read it, all of that good stuff. There's a week about why did Jesus have to die on the cross. There's a week about sin and hurt and forgiveness. So yeah, it's an incredible series, just asking those big questions. And we have really found, so we've run it twice now. We run it every other year. And we've just found that, whether you've seen it twice before, whether you've seen it once before, or whether you've never seen it, you can always take something from the series. It's incredibly well done. I mean, millions of dollars were spent on it, and it's phenomenal. It's super engaging. And so the way that we run it, if you go to the Youth Alpha kind of website, is there's videos that go along with them. And for middle schoolers, what we do is there's an opportunity to break 3 times. It asks 3 big questions throughout the videos. And so for middle schoolers, we break in the middle of the teaching time because it's like 20 to 25 minutes long. So that's a long time for middle schoolers to sit there and listen to something. So we pause during those questions and we leave like 5 to 7 minutes for small group time to ask that question. Then we come back, watch the next section of the video, break again, and then do the last section of the video. And we've just found that by doing this, they're more focused because they have one question to answer. They just heard, 5 to 7 minutes of content, so they can kind of process that right away. So that's how we run it for middle schoolers. And then for high schoolers, we just watch the video all the way through, and then we break into our small group times at the end. But man, like we have seen such incredible growth when we show the Youth Alpha series. Kids invite their friends because it's like, hey, you don't have to know anything about Christianity, and you can watch this and gain a better understanding. And so unchurched kids love it because it gives them a background for what they could be learning about and the importance of it. And then church kids, it gives them a foundation to explain their faith to people. I remember in high school, I would get so flustered when I would talk about the Bible because I was like, I don't know, the facts of how it's backed up or how I know it's true or any of that kind of thing. Not because nobody taught it to me. I just wasn't engaged with the conversation. But through Youth Alpha, it talks about like how many transcripts there are and how closely they were written to when the Bible or when the events happened. And so it just gives our church kids a foundation to explain their faith. So, I mean, it has been so huge for our ministry. We won't be running it this fall, but we'll run it the next fall because we just did a cycle of it. But it's It is amazing. I recommend it to anybody. It's Canadian made, but it's not super Canadian. Like you can't really tell that it's Canadian. There's no references. But it is phenomenal. It would be great if you had a student leadership team even and you wanted to test it with them. I can't speak enough about Youth Alpha. It has been incredible for our ministry and for our students growing in their confidence in God.
That's awesome. So you do it, across the board, middle school, high school, every other year in your regular programming, right? So instead of whatever series, you're just going to do this. And how long was it, you say? 13 weeks?
Yeah, it's 13 weeks. We show 9 of them. 3 of them are designed to happen over like a weekend. And some of them are just a little bit more complex. Like how to be filled with the Holy Spirit is one of them. And so we don't do those 3 that are designed to happen over the spiritual retreat weekend. We just take those ones out because we're like, you know what, like for unchurched kids, this is still kind of a weird topic to talk about. So we take those ones out. So we do 9 of the 13 weeks. But yeah, it's incredible.
And then, you said, you do it every other year. So does that mean most students, if they were with you from 6th through 12th grade, they get it 3 times repeated?
Yes.
The same?
Yep. Yeah. So they have 2 different versions of it. They have like one from I want to say 2015 maybe. And then they just redid it in 2018. And so we'll cycle through, every other year, swapping out the 2015 and the 2018 version. But they could hear it, 3 times through their years with us. But I have heard so many times from kids that have done it twice now that like, hey, we could run this every year and I would still get something different from it because it hits you. It's just like the Bible, right? It just hits you at different points in your life. You get something different from it. And it's so well done. It's so engaging that kids have said like, you know what? We really like this series. We could keep running it. And I'm like, okay, but I don't want to oversaturate, your years with us, especially because we show it to middle schoolers and high schoolers. But yeah, they don't seem to be getting tired of it, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's good. It's foundational. You know what I mean? So it's like the fundamentals and important things like that. It is good for them to hear that over and over again. So that makes a lot of sense. So it ends up being 9 weeks. So it's kind of like 2 months of your year, but then you only do it every other year. So that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, that was really helpful. How can people connect with you if they have any questions or they're wondering more about what we've talked about or they just want to follow on social media? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on social media at Sydney Lester right now until I get married in August, and then my last name will change, but you can find me there, or my email is sydneylester@connexuschurch.com. And I love connecting with people, so feel free to reach out. Student ministry can sometimes feel like an island, and so I just love cheering people on and helping them in whatever way I can. So yeah, everybody, you can feel free to reach out at any of those avenues.
Awesome. That's great. Well, congratulations on your upcoming wedding.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming on the podcast to talk all about this. You all are doing amazing work at Connexus, and it's cool to see it and hear it from afar. Or actually, I just reached out to different people on your staff last week to hear a little bit more about some other things that are going on, not in the next gen world, but just with like reaching first time visitors and some of that. And so you're just doing a great work and influencing, I'm sure, a lot of churches there, but here in the States as well. So we appreciate it and keep up the great
awesome
work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
No problem.
Well, I enjoyed that conversation. I knew I would. Connexus does an amazing job as a church, but especially reaching people who are not a part of any church. And I knew that'd be true of their student ministry too. And some of the action items I think of coming out of that interview with Sydney include, 1, figuring out what % of your student families are part of the church. So of your students that are attending, what % of them have their parents attending the church? Again, it's not like there's some goal or some benchmark that it should be, but I think it could influence decisions you make. If 70% of the students in your church have their parents attending, that's great to know. And you might communicate with them a certain way, but maybe there's this 30% whose parents don't attend. And you always knew there were people and students in your ministry like that, but you didn't know how many. If you knew almost a third of your students were in that camp, maybe you would communicate differently with those families, with those students, with those parents. Maybe you'd invite them to something, so many different things. I think another action step would be to look at Youth Alpha. Sounds like a great curriculum, for lack of a better term, to help teach students the foundations of faith, talk about big questions. Even if you came up with something else, that's great. In fact, I'd love to hear about it. Email me at nick@nickblevins.com if you have something similar to Youth Alpha that you've used in your ministry and you think is very helpful. And then the third action step I think of is just doing a lead small training with your small group leaders in student ministry. There's just great content out there. If you subscribe to Weekly with Orange, go to goweekly.com. They give you great stuff for free. As part of that, I saw they had a new video for small group leaders that came out this month in our weekly subscription. But certainly the lead small training would be really, really helpful. You can get all the links and show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 156. If you do subscribe to my email list, you'll get the email hopefully about this episode with a link to Sydney's volunteer job description and checklist. If not, you can subscribe at that link on my site so that you get those emails and you'll get access to this podcast bonus, this email exclusive, as well as all of them that are going to be part of the podcast starting, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 episodes ago. And now going forward, there'll be a different email exclusive with each podcast episode. So thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for sharing it, talking about it, leaving questions and comments and ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. I so appreciate that. Hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.